I'm Elina Sauvain and I'm from Switzerland. I wish you welcome to my presentation about rot holes and saproxylic beetles. But first of all, let's explain what a rot hole is. The creation of a rot hole requires an injured tree, for example, as a result of logging or the breaking of a large branch. When the wound does not heal, it begins to decay, and after decades, this forms a cavity in the tree called a rot hole. These cavities contain soil, which looks like earth, as it consists of decaying organic matter. This is what I analyzed chemically as a part of my study, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. I would like to emphasize here the importance of these structures because they are necessary for the survival of many specific and rare saproxylic beetles. Besides, they need a really long time of development. The second important concept is the one of saproxylic beetles. The term is used to describe a group of insects which are dependent on decaying wood for at least a period in their lifetimes. Many of them have, due to the evolution, very specific needs, and that makes them rare. In addition to this rarity, their populations collapse at a 2% rate each year, which is a dramatic drop. I know some people might ask why this is so dramatic. In fact, these insects play a major role in the forest's resilience. That does mean they help preventing the ecosystem from collapsing, for instance, after extreme weather events. These, as we know, will increase with climate change, so it's really important to preserve the saproxylic beetles as they also protect our forests. They obviously play other important roles, as for example, redistributing nutrients. My study was carried out in order to address the nowadays existing lack of knowledge. This will eventually make their protection more efficient. In practice, the aim of my study was to sample cavities in a chestnut forest and then to determine whether there are links between these qualities and the populations of saproxylic beetles inhabiting them or not. My scientific study was made to be as reproducible as possible. So that does mean I made as many replicas as possible. I normalized all possible parameters as well, and I repeated some measurements. After having found the cavities, I wanted to find out what species of beetles lived there. So to do so, I used a white sheet, as you can see on the image, and that I did to facilitate the seek for living larvae or insect rests, as for instance, elytra, thorax, excrements, or other body parts. These founds allowed a very precise identification of the present species. I did also sample some soil in each cavity and measured many physical parameters related to the rot holes. So let's now see at all these abiotic parameters. The second part of the work, as you can see, happened in a lab. So there I analyzed the soil samples by measuring, for instance, acidity, phosphorus level, and organic matter level. So that were my chemical parameters. The physical parameters measured on the cavities were, for example, temperatures related to the cavity, its metric dimensions, the number of surrounding trees, the soil humidity, and so on. The last part of my work consisted in analyzing the gathered data. So to do so, I used actually quite usual methods, statistical methods, as linear regressions and logistic regressions in order to take into account the binary variables I had. So, for instance, presence-absence information of the beetles found were binary variables. And lastly, I also did some analysis of variance. So that was used for further investigation. Here we see two of the very many results of the study with regard to the abiotic part. The graph on the left shows that the temperatures associated with the cavities are relatively stable, but different between the soil, the air inside the cavity, and the air outside the cavity. The analyses show that the results are statistically very different. The graph on the right shows that the phosphorus level is clearly correlated with the soil's pH. Besides, I found out that phosphorus levels in the rot holes are up to 10 times higher than in similar environments, and the pH levels vary between 2.6 and 4.5, which proves an exceptionally strong acidity level for such kind of natural environments. Here we see the main results regarding the species needs. So each colored box corresponds to a significant statistical test I carried out. We can see that some species have common needs, as for instance Ichnodes sanguinicolis and Cardiophorus gramineus. Indeed, as we see in the table, they both have a green box. However, some species have opposite needs. Thus, Ampidus praeustus seeks cavities containing plant rests, while Ichnodes sanguinicolis avoids them. I would like here to emphasize that these results are, as far as I know, entirely new. Indeed, I couldn't find them mentioned in any existing literature. So we can now answer the research question, as we clearly proved that the environment's characteristics influences the occupation of rot holes by certain saproxylic beetles. From our results, we can conclude that saproxylic beetles have various needs. Thus, they also need rot holes with various characteristics. But we can remember that rot holes need decades to develop. So the problem today is that the majority of trees in forests are felled before cavities can form. Thus, beetles cannot find suitable habitat, and that does explain the drastic drop in their populations. So to protect them, we really need to let more trees grow old in order to protect the associated species by creating networks of suitable habitats. Now, of course, my work has also its limits. For instance, due to the limited resources allowed for my work, there are not enough replicates, so the statistic might be a little bit shaky. In addition to that, the sampling could have been done several times during the year in order to take into account seasonal variations of some parameters. The study also fails to explain the origin of phosphorus very clearly. And finally, there was very little available literature, so that made the whole a little bit tricky. Nevertheless, there are several major strengths to this work as well. Firstly, I would like to mention that the results enable immediate action for the beetles' preservation by letting a network of trees grow old, among others, in forests. Secondly, the results are consistent with the existing literature. And finally, as much remains unknown about these insects, the study brings new ideas and leads for further investigation. So thank you very much for listening.